Welcome to the Dennis Report. I'm Dennis Atchison. Global warming, climate change, the environment, behaviors of industry, behaviors of individuals. All of these things come to play in taking care of this place we live called Earth. And it's come to that point in time where we have to pay attention that it is all connected and all of our actions do affect future generations. So today we're going to explore the theme of climate change and personal behavior for responsibility for how we impact the environment and see how everything is connected and how we might make things just a little bit better. We're really pleased today to have Peter Corbyn from GreenNexxus. He's got an unusual title, so I'll get him to explain it to us. We're going to talk about environmental stuff, economic stuff, and maybe some soulful, spiritual stuff too, because everything's connected that way. So Peter, thanks for coming to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
And since I gave you such a lame intro to your title, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about your title and how you got here?
Thank you. So yes, my title is Chief of Green. Our business is GreenNexxus. I'm a co-founder. We're about 6 years old now. And when we started about 6 years ago, we decided we would have not typical titles. So I've been doing this green stuff now for almost 20, actually more than 20 years now, and everyone decided I should be the Chief of Green, so hence my title.
Chief of Green. His eyes are brown, by the way, and he's wearing a blue jacket, so we got all the color spectrums going.
Yes.
So Chief of Green, but it's got a lot more to it than that, but it's a nice way to summarize or capture it. So is it environmental? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Like green? Green's used a lot these days.
Yeah, green, I think actually green is used a lot, and I think too much now, but maybe I could be Chief of Sustainability or Chief of Ethics or whatever, but it's green right now. I started doing this stuff about over 20 years ago. I lived in Ontario and I worked for a company that manufactured car seats for Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And I was happily making car seats and headrests and armrests every day of my life. And this is in a factory with about 350 employees, a really large plant. And one day my boss, the plant manager, came up to me and said, someone else has taken over your production line, so you've got 2 weeks to come up with a new job for yourself. So I wasn't getting laid off, but this is a billion-dollar company. I was told to create a job for myself, which is kind of interesting. So this was almost 22 years ago. And so I was in my mid-20s, or late 20s, I guess, and I spent a week being ticked off. I just lost my job and someone else took over my job, so what am I going to do now? Yeah. So I thought, you know what, I better come up with something quickly. So I wanted to add value to the business that had a metric attached to it. I don't like waste. Waste drives me nuts. And I'm looking forward from that point. I wanted to improve my public speaking skills. So I'm wondering, how can I put all three of those into the same bucket? So I actually created in Ontario in 1992 the first employee engagement, employee energy awareness program in Ontario. So we worked with Ontario Hydro at the time. We actually trained 350 employees on how to identify energy savings in the factory. So they all sat through from the plant manager to the custodian. Yeah. Taught them what a compact fluorescent light bulb was, that big motor in the corner, how much does it cost to run. Long story short, we ended up saving $150,000 a year on $1 million energy bill, or 15%, reduced our energy cost by 15%, hence our carbon footprint. Our total capital cost was $10,000. So the payback was like this. So it's really, I became known, and I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a mechanical engineer. Yeah. And so I can poke fun at my own trade, but many engineers are known not to have common sense, and I became known as the engineer with common sense around there. Yeah.
And that was 92.
92.
Because one of the things that a lot of businesses are looking for are efficiencies, not just the scale or distribution mechanisms, but on production.
Yep.
So you guys could probably go into a company, a factory, and say, well, if you change this, 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 you'll save 15%, just like your story, say 15% rather than generate new revenue of a 15%.
Well, that's the thing with energy efficiency for manufacturing companies is it's usually easier to find a 10% savings on 1% of your cost than it is to increase your sales by 10%.
Yes.
So an actual 10% savings in energy equals an increase in 10% in sales, which is a lot bigger number to reach. The other interesting thing with energy, because as you know, 95% of energy is essentially non-renewable. So therefore, the more energy you use, the higher your carbon footprint. About 5 years ago, I won't say the name of the company, but it's a company in New England who supplies Walmart. And this is about the time Walmart was looking at wanting to encourage their vendors to reduce their carbon footprint. So we went in there and we helped them reduce their energy consumption substantially. Them not linking the fact that we're helping reduce their carbon footprint as well, which we did by about 20%. So the context then becomes, not only did we save energy, but we can now go to one of our major clients and say, we've reduced our carbon footprint by X.
Fascinating stuff. Which are then tied to, in our drive up, we're talking about the moral fiber of a company or being authentic.
Yes.
So don't just window dress your green activity, but actually do it and embody it. So do you find that's a big challenge, working with companies to get them not just to do it so that they've got a new piece in their PR campaign, but they actually mean it? You know, speak to some of those challenges.
I think it's really important to embed it, to make it part of the fiber, whether it's environmental or energy, social responsibility, governance in general, and making it part of what the company does and part of their culture. Probably the best example of that in letting time go by is kind of funny. About 5 years ago, I was hired to, again, this company I worked for 20 years ago is in the automotive parts manufacturing sector in Ontario. And about 5 years ago, I was hired to do essentially the same thing in scope for the entire industry in Canada. So I started making phone calls to companies like Magna, which many people have heard, like Frank Stronach's multi-billion-dollar company, and companies like Dana and Siemens, and to offer our assistance to help these companies. And I called up my previous employer, Woodbridge Foam, and I said, we're offering the service to help you save energy, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, no, we're okay, thanks. We're well on the way. It's part of our culture now. This was a young engineer that didn't know I was there 15, 20 years earlier. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. I don't need myself anymore. So, yeah, if it becomes part of the culture, then that's very important.
Your cultural shift, and so far we've only touched on manufacturing, and we're talking industrial, which would then tie to economy and jobs and stuff. So, sort of connected. We often hear in the media about green jobs or trying to get industry, and New Brunswick has a certain amount of its economy based on industry, manufacturing, and part of its identity is how do you get the cultural shift to get that industry to adapt to green jobs, or do we need to sunset some industries so that some new ones can come in and take that gap for the next 100 years? And anytime you say the word green or environmentally friendly or sustainable, it invites a transition. It's like going through a threshold.
Right.
This is the way we've done it for this many years, and now we need to start doing it this way. You guys sit right on the cusp of that. So if it's New Brunswick, what does New Brunswick need to do, whether it's government change or economic change or industrial change? I know it's a big question,
right,
but that's what we're in right now. 2012, 2013, 2015, be an era of change. Systems need to change. And you sit right on as a catalyst for that.
Right.
You know?
I think what we need to do is rethink how industries think of each other. I'm not a big fan of quote unquote a green job because, quite frankly, every job should be a green job. Whether it's what you do, whether it's what someone that's serving at Tim Hortons does, manufacturing a pair of jeans or working at a bank, sustainability should be embedded within what you do. So to say that's a green job over there, well, everyone's job should have an element of that. The other interesting thing in some of the conversations I've had recently is, we've looked at traditional industries in New Brunswick, being natural resource based, for example. And then you look at the IT sector. Why don't we look at taking them and putting them together and thinking, okay, if we're going to extract natural resources, whether it be trees or a mine or something, why on earth can't we add a lot more value add to whatever the product is, and then actually, perhaps leverage some of that IT knowledge to add to that value add for whatever those natural resources are. A great example is, and I might have the name of the material here wrong, but Bolivia, if I'm not mistaken, Bolivia, and you can fact check this later because I've a lot of stuff goes in my brain and not much sticks sometimes. But if I'm not mistaken, Bolivia has one of the largest deposits of lithium in the world.
Peter Lindfeld spoke about that, I believe, in the last show.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay. And we know what that material is going to be needed for is batteries. So as the electric vehicle market grows, the need for that product or that raw material is going to grow substantially. Yeah. So if you're in Bolivia, you're thinking, okay, the world is going to come beating a path to our door because they're going to want the stuff that's under our ground. How can we take advantage of this ourselves as a country? So they're looking at actually adding value to themselves. So why not put a factory that actually takes the raw material and turns it into something in Bolivia, creating jobs, creating wealth in Bolivia. So I think that type of example is something New Brunswick, quite frankly, could look at.
So they could be doing the same thing here, but not about lithium.
No, with whatever the natural resources that we're looking to extract here, 100%.
You said an interesting thing earlier about marrying industry with IT. Mm-hmm. Any other examples with that? Because industry, they all tend to work in silos. Rather than everybody works in their silo, they don't figure out where the fit is. So you could do value added right here. Yep.
Silos drive me crazy. I mean, silos are just silos, right? I mean, why? If you look at the knowledge that it would take to do a certain type of, even if it's logistics, for example, or looking at automation of something, or a different way of looking at packaging, or whatever it is. If you break down all of the elements, whether it's making beer or making the boxes of the beer that go in, or whatever, there are elements of that that can feed into other sectors, into other. Wow, we never thought of it doing it that way. Create a company.
Yeah, good. Can a community do the same thing?
Can a community do the same thing?
Yeah, can a community, because we're talking industry, maybe we can switch it to a whole community becoming more green and more efficient.
Interesting. I think that's possible. It would be a community by community basis, depending on what the resources are available there. For example, you look at a small community, with a mill, for example, and you look at the way that energy gets to that mill. Perhaps there's an opportunity to use the energy more efficiently with what could be called a cogeneration plant, where you manufacture, or you create the electricity, but then you've got steam that could be used perhaps to heat the town, which could ultimately A, reduce the carbon footprint of the town, mm-hmm. but B, reduce the cost of energy, which could make it more attractive from an economic development perspective. So that's one way of looking at it. The other is, how can communities leverage what they've got from tourism is a big one, obviously. And how can you, from an ecotourism perspective? Mm-hmm. So I think every community is different. If you really dig down into the weeds of each community, there has to be something there the community can take advantage of. One other example could be leveraging the community, or some of the library in a community, to help small businesses expand beyond where they are today. So there may be small businesses, one or two people that are doing a particular skill or a trade, that perhaps that could, certain things you have to physically be there, like an electrician or a carpenter, but perhaps there are things people are doing online, like graphic designers, for example, that could actually export what they do if they were helped to be given the skills to do that and take their skill set beyond the boundaries of their community or their county, or a certain part of the province. Yeah.
There's an interesting story I found online a little while ago about a community in Germany. It's generating 321% of its energy, and then feeding that energy back into the grid and using that to offset their tax base or offset their infrastructure costs. During the NB Power not for sale stuff, and the Graham government's attempt to sell NB Power and the way people responded to all of that. A lot of interesting things percolated up that never really took traction, in that a lot of experts surfaced because the debate was more wide-ranging rather than political. And the theme of New Brunswick being a great center for wind energy surfaced because of our 3 coasts, etc. That's one of the pieces. Is there something we're not seeing yet that we could actually be starting to plant the seeds for, so that 20 years from now we get the benefit of, much like that German town saw 20 years ago, we got to get away from our industrial base. So if we convert to producing self-sustaining energy supply, maybe that's something we could do. We're so small, New Brunswick's so small, and we have 3 coasts. There'll be a lot of critics about wind energy because it's not constant and stuff, but if you live out in the Bay of Chaleur, they'd be pretty much telling you the wind blows all the time. Yeah. So is there something we're not seeing because it doesn't want to come click yet, but are we closer?
That's a very open question that
So, or flipped another way, in the year 2050, what does New Brunswick look like in terms of generating its own energy and its quality of life?
Right. Wow. So let's sit here and talk about something that's 35 years from now. Thanks, Dennis. Let's take a stab at it.
No, but that's that thrust, because we need to let go of some old behaviors and get into some new ones.
Right.
So we need the visionaries to start to map out, well, we could be doing it this way, could be doing it this way.
Right.
And after a discussion of 3 or 4 years, maybe we'll settle on it and then turn it into an action instead of just talk all the time.
Well, that actually leads to a couple of good points, and one with respect to the smart grid. So I'll talk about energy in two or three ways. Number one, I think that it's early days, but I think tidal power, Bay of Fundy, and this talks to industry and IT and just intelligence in general. You look at the Bay of Fundy, I mean, naturally, the most optimum place on the planet for tidal power, right? So why are we not taking the lead in this province in developing tidal power that we can then export around there? Why aren't we doing that? To me, tidal power development should be high on the radar in this province. I know Nova Scotia's got 2 or 3 pilot projects going on their side in the Minas Basin, but I think that we really should be encouraging a lot of that too. So that's number one. Number two is what we've all heard of, the smart grid. Right, so the smart grid.
So we think we know what it means because we recognize the word smart and the word grid.
Right.
We might not quite know what it means.
What does it really mean? Really, it's, if you make an analogy to the internet, if you look at, let's go back, even 30 or 40 years, the power grid consisted of a number of really large generating stations. Point Lepreau, Coulson Cove, and quite frankly, they're small relative to some larger ones, for example, in Ontario. But in New Brunswick, they are large generating plants, 600, 700 megawatts. You make an analogy to the internet. The internet didn't exist 25, 30 years ago. We had these big honking mainframes the size of hockey rinks that had less power, computing power than our iPhone today or a BlackBerry, right?
Yeah.
So to make that analogy, fast forward to now, the internet now, I mean, you and I can sit here in beautiful St. Andrews and broadcast this across Canada, or you can sit in your basement in Tuktoyaktuk and post something on the internet for someone in Australia to see 10 seconds later. That has gone boom in the last 20 years, and that sense of communication and ability to get your word out is amazing. The same thing is going to happen with power generation. It has to, for a couple of reasons. Number one, renewable energies, solar, wind, tidal, that's going to come from where the energy is.
It's geographic.
It's geographic. Someone can put up a solar panel in their backyard, or they can put up a wind turbine in their backyard, and they can say, to heck with you, grid, I'm powering myself now, right? So they've got their own little micro grid, if they like. The other is, quite frankly, every utility on the planet is broke.
Yes. Right?
They're all in debt.
Yes.
So these mega projects, these $12, $13 billion projects are going to dry up. So there has to be a new financial model and a new construction model in order to generate electricity. And then the other is, a lot of these plants, I mean, Point Lepreau got a life extension of 20, 25 years or whatever it was, but in reality, a lot of these, generating facilities that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they're going to come to an end of life.
Yeah.
What are they going to be replaced with? It doesn't make sense to replace 600 megawatt generating station with perhaps another one. Why not go out there and decentralize the energy generation?
So that has a lot of implications attached
Big
to that.
time. And the third, well, the third one actually, and this is a term most people aren't familiar with, is a negawatt. Negawatt.
Okay.
So what a negawatt is it's a utility saving a megawatt as opposed to creating a megawatt. So the capital cost of building a megawatt is somewhere between $1 million to $2 million. So if you put up a 1 megawatt wind turbine, you're looking at probably maybe $3 million now. A utility could spend $200,000 or $300,000 to conserve a megawatt, by encouraging you to change your light bulbs or whatever. So it's actually more cost effective to actually not produce a megawatt as it is to actually produce one.
So which means change the demand for consumption.
Correct.
Which gets to households and individuals changing their behaviors.
Yes.
And changing some expectations.
Behaviors, and what the smart grid can do is, if you're a willing participant in this process, is to actually, picture right now, I mean, if you would have told me 15, 20 years ago that you'd have 6 devices in your house hooked up to the internet, you would have said you're crazy, right?
Yeah.
Everyone in the house today has 2 or 3 phones on the internet on your Wi-Fi, an iPad or 2 or some equivalent, 1 or 2 computers, maybe a laptop or desktop, and everyone in the family's got some kind of device on Wi-Fi. The same will be true in the future of the smart grid with respect to appliances in your home. For example, NB Power right now is working with Siemens to create smart hot water heaters. You don't need your hot water heater to run all the time.
No,
right?
It's one of the biggest changes, just like your fridge.
Exactly. Your fridge can be used much less of the time than it is. So why not have those appliances and devices actually managed by the grid and only turned on when they're needed? So I venture to guess that 10 years from now, that a smart appliance, whether it's a hot water heater, a refrigerator, even perhaps your AC or your heat pump, they'll be hooked up to the grid. They'll have an internet protocol or an IP address, and they will be controlled either by you or the grid, which ties back to why New Brunswick could be such a great place to take advantage of this. The partnership between Siemens, and specifically to talk about business for a second, the partnership between Siemens and New Brunswick, or NB Power, I think it's fantastic. Siemens recognizes that, this is a small province, so we can get stuff done fast, which is a good thing, right? And they recognize that the smart grid is coming, so why not be one of the leaders in that transition over time? So we have the ability here in this small province to use it to our advantage to actually create these technologies that can be exported to the whole world. That could create tens, if not hundreds, of businesses in New Brunswick with the capability to export smart technology from a power generation perspective globally.
Am I missing this? I read a fair amount of newspapers today. I don't remember reading any of that kind of storyline. It's usually an IT storyline, or is that the IT storyline about creating smart grid appliances or creating a...
It's on the cusp. It's like if someone was sitting here 15 years ago and saying, you're going to be on the internet, you're going to use this thing called Wi-Fi, and that cell phone you have that's half the size of a brick, it's going to be the size of your palm in 15 years. That's where the smart grid is today. That's why the general public isn't that familiar with where it's going to be. That's why it's not a story yet.
When you talk about 20 years ago, there's a fun thing you can do if you want. Go on YouTube, type in CBC, type in internet, and probably somewhere in the scroll you'll see a clip from 1994, Peter Mansbridge, looking younger, saying, we've got a special report from Bob Cameron on a new phenomenon called the internet.
I remember that.
And it's about 7 minutes long, and you hear the clack, clack, clack of the keys, and so-and-so's talking to someone in Taiwan, talking to someone in Soviet Union, fascinating, rate of change.
Yes.
So how do we integrate in the rate of change the degree of human behavior change that needs to happen so that there's 10 generations from now that are still here living on a habitable planet?
I think that comes down to, from a social sciences perspective, a marketing perspective, we need to make certain behaviors normal. And part of the problem in the past, you look at the use of seatbelts. Two analogies: use of seatbelts and smoking. Quite frankly, two major human behaviors that took probably a decade or two to change. Now you look at the rate of change today with our behavior with respect to our interaction with smartphones, for example. Who'd have thunk that even 5 years ago that you'd be doing 90% of your stuff like this, and who'd have thunk that if I told you
all these middle-aged, sorry, not all middle-aged people, but everyone's looking at a 2 square inch screen now.
Exactly, and just on the news, I think it was on CBC maybe 3 weeks ago that more traffic accidents now and deaths are caused by people texting while they're driving than drinking and driving. Even 5 years ago, that would have been a bizarre thing to say.
So here's a nice paradox. In one way, we can see a certain rate of change because there's technological change in human behavior. And in the other way, humans haven't changed at all. They still do stuff that's sort of detrimental to their own existence, and struggle to see how they're connected with each other or connected to a bigger picture. Because we get bombed so much with information, rate of change. For instance, in education, some people would say that, we need to put a laptop program in the schools, but the overhead costs are just insane, and the maintenance costs, and then teaching the student to use the equipment. But learning is learning. So you could have a blackboard and a piece of chalk and a great relationship with your teacher, and you'll start to absorb math, and you'll start to absorb languages and stuff. So does doing a laptop program in New Brunswick in middle school actually help its literacy rates, actually help its civic engagement rates, those sorts of things? It's fascinating because it's a contradiction, because sometimes that tool really allows you to accelerate the learning. I'm thinking of Hans Rosling doing his thing about complex statistical data, but done in a very short period of time and made it a story, made it fun.
Two anecdotes and just my thoughts on that. A couple of anecdotes actually. Our daughter Paige, she's 12 years old, and we live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and she's now at the National Ballet School in Toronto, and which is kind of an incredible thing for someone her age. But she,
I take it she takes after mom, right?
Oh yeah, you don't want to see me in a tutu. That's
sorry.
That's not happening.
We're just dancing, man.
Yeah, not me, not me. But thanks to technology, we can FaceTime now or Skype, and we can talk to each other and physically see each other, which is great. But interestingly enough, I was talking to her last night, and she took a laptop to school, and I said, and the laptop was sitting exactly where it was when I left it there 2 weeks ago, and I said, "Have you used your laptop yet?" And she said, "No." Case in point. So that was anecdote number one. So she hasn't used her laptop yet. The other is when, although I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, my dream when I was younger was to be an architect. And by a series of events, I actually ended up in my first year out of school 26 years ago, designing and building a house, not too far from here. And it was before you could afford AutoCAD or design something on
you had a slide rule, you had a T-square, you had your drafting table.
You got it in HB and HB2 pencils or whatever. And I designed this and built it, and that was nice. That was in 1987. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, the gentleman who I built that house for asked me to design another one for him. And this sounds kind of odd, but I refused to do it on a computer. I wanted to go back to the T-square and use a pencil because there's something lost in translation from doing this or doing this with a mouse than actually taking a pencil and doing this, and there's a bedroom, and there's the washroom, and there's the living room. And you could feel like you're part of what you're designing. There was a connection to what you were doing. And I'm worried that we lose that connection if we're doing this all the time. There's a disconnect from reality depending on what you're doing.
Yeah.
My other thought with, I'm a big fan of connecting people and connecting, for example, one laptop per child in Africa, I think is great, just so they can see what's going on in the rest of the world. But I'm hesitant to think that this thing is the solution to all, because quite frankly, a large percentage of the population don't want to, can't work with these darn things. We still need people to build things. We still need homes. We still need houses. We still need buildings. We still need skills. We still need people that don't have to be on a computer. And the more people find their way with what it is, the better. You know, perhaps I'm really bad at this, whatever it is, and it took me away from finding my real skill set down the road.
Yeah, well, humans are social animals, and we travel in packs. We do stuff as groups and herds, and so that's been called antisocial or asocial. And at some point, the human drive to connect with another human and to connect in a group with shared values and then go create actions and make things happen. That's one of the main drivers of what we do. So maybe I have a little bit of faith that we will never lose our social humanity. And those tools, though, have become the focus. In a way, you can generalize that and say we keep focusing on things as outcomes, and we're entering a whole new phase that's systemic. So when organizing some things back in Fredericton, the Great Gathering, for example, it's an invitation for people to come together on a large scale to find what they have in common to create the change that they've been looking for, because they needed each other to create that change, rather than here's this great design, or I'm going to stay in my silo and only work in my silo. Anything that ties with environment then gets into how we have to start working together. So there might be 100 solutions out there, but because we're not working together very well, then we'll never really get to those solutions. Which is my awkward segue to try to get to another phase in this discussion with you, is give us a little bit of a short history of your Al Gore training. It was what, 7, 8 years ago now?
7 years ago, yeah.
You were part of the first 200 that took the An Inconvenient Truth training. So were you the only one from Canada? Was there one other one from Canada? Fill in a bit, and then I want to get into climate change.
Sure. So that was an incredible experience. So An Inconvenient Truth, the movie, came out in the summer of 2006. And within probably a month of the movie being released, by fluke, I heard on the radio that Al Gore was looking to train 1,000 people to do that presentation live. So that was about August of 2006. And so I, at that point in time, what's become known as the Climate Project now the Climate Reality Project, didn't even exist. Gore put it out there and had no organization yet to fulfill on the
Yeah.
So I put in my resume and my argument as to why I should do this, and having the background and experience in climate change. And lo and behold, in January of 2007, I had the opportunity to go to Nashville. So what he actually did, and this was in the fall of 06 and the winter of 07. So he actually did train 1,000 people at first, essentially in groups of 200. The first one I think was only 55, groups of 200. And I was in the group January 4th to 6th of 2007. Of that first 1,000, there were 21 Canadians, a few from, I think, Europe, but for the most part, Americans. Very diverse by design. For example, Cameron Diaz is a classmate, for example. An NFL football player, I think he's retired now, Danny Jones, is a classmate. Nashville country singers, very diverse, from business to academia to non-government organizations and everything between. So the deal was, you go to Nashville and you get trained. Basically what Mr. Gore did is he took you through that PowerPoint, and it took like 12 hours to do it. Then we were taught some communication skills, a lot of the science behind climate change. And the deal was, you do 10 presentations as a volunteer in your community, and then your debt is paid, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
So I came back. I did one radio interview soon after this, and within a 5-month run from late January to early June of 2007, what was supposed to have been 10 presentations was 55.
Yeah.
For about 12,000 people.
Hit the ground running.
Hit the ground running and didn't stop. In New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, and Ontario. I had no idea that this would happen. It was like getting, to use a quote we've used a lot within the Climate Reality Project, it's like drinking from a garden hose.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was the first one in Atlantic Canada. Carl Divenvoiden, who many Atlantic Canadians will know now, was the second from Atlantic Canada. He's made me look lazy. He's in like the 200, 300 club. He's incredible. He's been amazing at that. So what's happened since is I retired at 65 presentations. But Mr. Gore has trained a few thousand people subsequently. We reached, last number I saw was something like 12 million people in presentations, in live presentations with that. So it's been an amazing experience.
So fascinating twist on what humans do with things. That all operates on the assumption that climate change is real, and that it's quantifiable, measurable, and it's attributed to human behavior. There's a lot of people out there that'll, not a lot, but there are some out there that will yang the exact opposite. Say, no, it's this natural cycle of the planet over a 1,000-year period, blah, blah, blah. I'm really fascinated not by how someone wants to come up with a contrary view, or not even where that agenda is coming from, because that gets back into the silos. Everybody's pitching rather than speaking authentically, and we get nowhere. We have to get past that somehow, because you can look at the news any given day, and there's a news story, and you said something interesting too. They talk about the weather. They don't talk about climate.
Right.
So play into that, because there's the stuff in Colorado right now. There's the stuff from last year with floods in Philippines and Arctic ice melting more than ever before, rising sea levels. All these things are measurable. We can agree that that change has occurred. We can't agree on why or how it occurred.
There are 2 points to that. I'll speak first to the rate of change, or some critics might say, it's the natural cycle of the Earth. If you look at the natural cycle of, yes, it's been warmer at times in the past, it's been cooler as well. That's been on roughly 100,000-year cycle.
Yes.
Okay? So if you go back to biblical times, that would represent 2% of that cycle. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at literally the last 150 years, or since the Industrial Revolution, the numbers are going up. Many people use the term like a hockey stick.
Yeah, or that's the scene in the Inconvenient Truth,
Correct,
where he gets on a cherry picker and up he goes. Yeah.
And my analogy to that, relative to the essentially natural cycle of climate and the global temperature going up and down, is, and I did the math because I'm an engineer. I do math, and I know you think math is boring, so I'll just throw one number at you here. But to make an analogy, if you were to take the rate of change over that, say, 100,000-year cycle and make that equivalent to the speed of someone walking, the rate of change in the last 150 years relative to someone walking would be something traveling at about 6,000 kilometers per hour. So picture a jet flying at like Mach 1, 10 times that speed. Yeah. is the new rate of change. So that's what's alarming. So that triggers our inability to be able to adapt to that change at that rate.
Now, when you say rate of change, do you mean specific to temperature, or volume of water on the planet, or
all of the above?
Okay.
Temperature, which has impacts all of those metrics, if you will. Now, specific to weather and climate. And again, you pointed out that we've got, just this summer alone, you look at all the fires in California and the flooding, and it seems to get worse every year. And you keep looking at the weather, and a critic or a climate denier would say, well, how can you tell? Because you can't tell what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. So how can you tell me what the climate's going to be like in 30 years? And this was thrown at me at a number of presentations, and I had to think about this one, but I made the analogy, to make an analogy to sports. Essentially, climate is a 30-year run of weather. Okay. So climate is a 30-year moving target. 30 years is roughly Gordie Howe's career.
Okay.
Or Wayne Gretzky's sort of career, his 20-year career, Rocket Clemens' career, right? Yeah. So in reality, in the early 80s and mid 80s, you could, for the most part, as long as Wayne Gretzky was healthy, you could, for the most part, predict how many points he would get in a given season. right? He went up and peaked around 200 and 250 points, and you knew as he got older, his productivity would go down, and when he retired, he was less than a point a game. So for the most part, you could sort of predict that. You could, with Sidney Crosby, if he kept healthy, you'd probably be able to predict.
Yeah, mathematical models to predict the future based on past.
Right, so you could predict Gordie Howe, Rocket Clemens, Wayne Gretzky's points performance over a given period of time. Now, when any one of those hockey players got out on the rink, could you tell if Gretzky was going to get a goal or an assist on any given shift?
Yeah.
You couldn't.
Yeah.
Could you predict if he'd get no points or goals in a game, or if he'd get 5 or 6? No. Could you predict he'd get 200 points in a season? Yes. That's the weather. The weather is a shift or a game for one of those players.
Good way of putting it. Frozen time context.
Correct. Al Gore stole that from me, by the way.
Yeah.
He did.
Good. Oh, well, did you get credit?
Probably not. It's okay.
Good fun. But so one of the dilemmas that we have in general, but it'll tie to climate change and being aware of it, is the challenge of how do we get all these humans, regardless of why it's happening, regardless of how quickly it's happening, because it seems to be its own, it is its own system, right?
Right.
But we got to get on with what are we responsible for collectively to do what we need to do so that there's something left 100 or 200 years from now, given this exponential rate of change. And that shifts you away a little bit from the scientific mathematical understanding of stuff into that human element, because we have to get people to buy in, be aware of, care about taking these things and putting them in recycling instead of chucking them out the car window.
Right.
So in all of your teachings that you've done now with all the presentations or dealing with corporations and getting them to embed in their behavior, this is real, not just smoke screens so you can get your market share up. So do you have any lessons, thoughts, anecdotes for someone who really got it, or someone, without giving away names, who they just sort of don't get it? Because you sit right on the cusp of that threshold of pulling an invitation into a new way of doing things.
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Does that
well,
sort
thanks,
of fit?
Dennis.
No, sorry, yeah.
No, it does. It's
because that's where we need to go. Humans
Yeah.
need to figure out how to do this together. And you have a process and a methodology that allows that to happen, whether it's the GreenNexxus software structure. You
Right.
could even slide, a good example might even be your 1 million acts of green story.
Right. Part of the challenge is, I think, from a behavior perspective, is two things. One is, what can you do to positively change the behavior of an individual? And the other is, quite frankly, fortunately, we live in a democracy, right?
A version thereof.
Yes, and we can vote,
Yeah.
right? Therefore, we should, as a population, should be able to affect public policy, which would be a positive thing. So I think from a behavior perspective, you know, you look at the blue box or recycling programs, for example. That's to turn things like that into a norm.
Like when you walk around somewhere, will you notice that? Does this community have a recycling structure program that lets its citizens engage? These things, the water bottle stuff, they'll promote that recycling rates of water bottles are in the 70% range. But it's dependent on the community having those facilities and that culture ingrained in it.
I do. I'm a bit odd like that. I'm very conscious that I walk around with my phone and I take pictures of green stuff everywhere, stuff that kind of sticks out. Last year I was in, I spent quite a bit of time in San Francisco last year in Silicon Valley, and I was in the head office of Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, the California equivalent basically of NB Power. And in their lobby, they had a long tube. It was about 3 feet high, and it was for battery recycling.
Very cool.
Put your batteries in this tube, and then they'll take them away to the appropriate place. So from a behavior perspective, the challenge is to make things easy for people. And when you look at a blue box, for example, and it's recycling day next Friday, whatever it is, you look down the street and you see blue box after blue box after blue box. Then it skips a house. And it's like, why aren't they recycling? So it's kind of a social, in your neighborhood, there's a social sort of aspect to.
Yeah, because it's visible.
You didn't. It's visible, right?
Yeah.
The challenge then is, without being sort of creepy, is so you might live 3 doors down from me, but I see that you're not recycling. But am I going to go into your shower and see if you got a low flow shower head?
Yeah.
That would be weird.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you address that particular behavior?
Household audits.
Yeah, household audits.
Just what you need, more government coming in.
Well, and it doesn't have to be government, though.
Exactly. It could be
Right.
not-for-profit organizations, or
Exactly.
you could just do it because it's a good thing to do.
Exactly.
On the looking down the street and seeing all the garbage bins and recycling thing, a pet peeve of mine, people will complain about the cost of garbage disposal, taxes going up, I think, well, why don't all of you just put 2 or 3 locations on your street so that the big truck, when it comes there, only has to stop 2 or 3 times
up in one
instead
place.
of 40 times, with the wear and tear on brakes, the gas, all that, and then the labor costs. You know, you could probably do a neighborhood in 1/3 the time if people on the street would just agree, use my driveway, and 10 houses close, plunk on that driveway, and
Right.
10 houses. There's so many little things we could do that don't cost any money, that would save money.
Or what if we took it one step further and took a lot of those products that we use and actually changed the packaging so there was less need to recycle in the first place? Buying local. I bet, I'm sure the studies have been done for this, but if, for example, if you were to go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and buy what you can there with the packaging they have there relative to the packaging perhaps they have in the large stores, I guarantee you're going to have a lot less packaging that you may have to recycle anyway.
Yep.
So maybe, and therein lies a catch-22, maybe that person without that blue box doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Because they don't have anything to recycle,
Yeah, because
right?
they've brought it down enough.
Exactly.
When you think about local food markets and stuff, Hellman's Mayonnaise did a really good 2-minute clip about 5 or 6 years ago about where does food come from in Canada. And I don't think they had an agenda to it. It was just one of those things that corporations sponsored a message. And someone did a lot of great research. So if you Googled it or YouTubed it, you'd find this, where does food come from in Canada? And it's scary. The comparative stats are scary because we import more food than we grow. So we don't have the ability to feed ourselves locally anymore. And that gets into packaging, that gets into the quality of the food you have.
And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the 100-mile diet, right? And the 100-mile diet is an interesting concept because, you know, it forces you to, it challenges you to actually, you know, not only reduce, it's a double win. It reduces the carbon footprint of what's on your plate,
Yep.
but it also helps local businesses. But it's difficult for the big, you know, chains to do that, because if you have a Big Mac, not to pick on a brand, but if you have a Big Mac in St. John, New Brunswick, you want that Big Mac to taste the same in Vancouver.
Yep.
Right?
Well, that's their brand.
Exactly. You can't do that if you go to you know, a local restaurant and have a great burger in New Brunswick. Hopefully it was, you know, New Brunswick grown burger. Odds are it's not going to taste the same as the burger you had in Vancouver, right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of.
Of course, being, you know, of a certain age and stuff, you don't eat burgers anymore, right? It's just salads and all
That's
that
right.
good,
yeah.
healthy diet stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely right.
Yeah, good fun. But I'm having fun with it because it's a behavior change on the consumer's part.
Yes.
It's always a giggle. We're sliding away from environmental stuff, but it all ties. When a Costco or a large box store comes into a town, any town, and you'll hear locals say, finally some competition. And it's the exact opposite. They have such a monopoly on their distribution chain and their supply chain that they can put all the local businesses out of business in a very short period of time because the local business can't compete with that. So the 100-mile diet is a lot more than just about buying local to eat properly, but the consumer has to give up choice. There's this rant somewhere, I heard Pierre Burton, CBC I think reran something because he wrote cookbooks and stuff as well. It's a 1980s rant and he got on about seasonal eating. What's happened? Why do you need strawberries in January? Why can't you have strawberries during strawberry season and cook that? And I thought, my goodness, it resonates. 30, 40 years later, that resonates. So food supply, environmental stuff, it's a bit of a hard right turn, but I like to go back to the naysayers on the climate change stuff. Because there might be some viewers out there who are still teetering. I know in my former workplace, there was one person who would always come at me about this stuff saying, it's not true, how can you believe it, blah, blah. So is there a resolution to that? I don't want to call it a conflict, but it's not right. But those two diametrically opposed points of view, is there something that you can help us or teach us to how to make some peace with when that happens? When the media comes up with, because media likes conflict model. Right. They will always build their stories based on a conflict model.
Well, if you look at you know, what's left out there of climate deniers, they're all going to the same small school of gotta deny this, quite frankly. I mean, to the credit of big oil, even some of the big oil companies are saying, yeah, it's here. The pool of deniers is shrinking, which is a good thing. But for the general population, those who think, well, all this climate change stuff is a bunch of bunk, et cetera, does it make sense to, from a renewable energy versus non-renewable energy, does it make sense to dig a hole in the ground to burn something so you can make your coffee in the morning? Or does it make sense to use a renewable energy? Because sooner or later, that non-renewable energy that you dig in the hole, it's going to be gone, period. Number two, from an energy efficiency perspective, so climate change is crazy, you guys are all nuts, the world's not going to end. Okay, so you've got an electricity bill that's $200 per month, to pick a number. And if I could help you save $50 a month on your an electricity bill, are you going to say no? Right? Why waste energy? Right? So, I mean, from a pure resource consumption perspective, to me, you should not frame it in the context of, this climate change stuff is crazy. Just ignore the news, right? Just ignore the flooding in Colorado and the forest fires and the heat waves and stuff. Just think of it from an efficient use of energy. Think of it from a, we talked earlier about, you mentioned the village in Germany. If you're able to make money to put up a wind turbine or solar panel in your backyard and make money, are you going to say no? You know what, I'm not going to put a, Point LaPro in your backyard. I'm not going to put Colson Cove in your backyard, but if you can put a wind turbine to make money, are you going to?
Yeah.
Well, heck yeah. Well, you know what? You can deny climate change all you want, but economically, you just came out ahead.
Yep.
Why would you say no to that?
Yeah, you make it a third option. Instead of getting caught in that paradigm, just switch the paradigm.
Exactly.
Similarly, what about on the consumer side of things? Say a Tim Hortons or somebody could come up with some sort of a program that got them away from the paper cup and into a reusable cup. Do you have any stories like that? And not necessarily Tim Hortons or any of the, the coffee shops, that kind of thing. That bit about you reuse it, or at least they're proactive to try to educate the consumer on their end and make it easy. Your point about making it easy.
Oddly enough, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a buddy of mine who's sort of working on that with Tim Hortons, and for example, Starbucks, they have a $1 reusable cup now that actually will deduct 10 cents or save you 10 cents from your next coffee with a refill if you bring that cup. So it's and again, as you keep pointing out, and I agree with you 100%, it's a behavior issue then. I fully intend to go to Starbucks. I don't drink coffee, so it's irrelevant to me. I fully intend to go to Starbucks with my cup in the morning and save 10 cents. And there are a few people in the population that can do that and never forget to do it. There are people with the reality of having, kids to drive you crazy in the morning, and you get in the car and you forget to take your reusable coffee cup. So there's a behavior thing there. So I think, Tim Hortons, Starbucks, whoever it is, can put that in place, but like you said, it comes down to behavior. So how do you make the habit of making sure you take that reusable cup every day a behavior that you do?
Or even within the store, when they're eating within the store, that they actually use a porcelain cup instead of taking the paper one.
Oh, 100%. Remember A&W? Remember those mugs at A&W?
Yes.
Weren't they great?
I think we have a root beer one somewhere.
Yeah, the A&W, they have I remember when I was a kid getting my hand stuck in the smaller cup. But I don't know if you noticed now, if you've been A&W recently, now granted it's a fast food joint, but they've actually reduced their packaging. And they state that right on the paper that wraps the burger, and there's less packaging in A&W now, which is a good thing. But
so that's like the retail and food line. There's industrial examples. Do you have a top 5 that anyone in our audience could do in their house? Because the greatest rate of change has to come from individuals acting in a collective, large-scale behavior. So do you have guidance for them, what that would be?
5, 6, 7 years ago, I would, my biggest piece of advice would be to change your light bulbs from the incandescent to the compact fluorescent light bulbs. Or as my mother calls them, the Dairy Queen light bulbs, because they look like a Dairy Queen ice cream cone.
Yeah.
That said, what's been interesting just in the last 5 or 6 year window is A, most people have done that now anyway, which is a good thing. B, a lot of jurisdictions now are making incandescent light bulbs not legal to use anymore. So that's a good change. But the reason I focus on the light bulb is because it's a visual thing.
Yeah,
you see it. You see it. And I go into stores and I look around, I walk like this and to see what the light bulb is. It's just symbolic, but you see it. Now I would almost shift that to LED lights. Yeah, they cost more now, but so do compact fluorescents. So I'm starting to put LED lights in our house now. So I would say start with the light bulbs because they're visual. You see them every day, so it's kind of a reminder. Behavior, not even behavior, but little things you could do would be low flow shower heads, which it could cost $15, $20 for the inexpensive ones. You get the high end funky ones for a bit more. Faucet aerators that go in your tap, they cost like $3 or $4 and they reduce the amount of water that goes through, by maybe 50 or 60%. Very cheap. You can do it yourself. Anyone can just unscrew the one and screw the other one back on. They're energy savings from hot water, so you're saving not just the water but the hot water. So I would say water-related ones. And if you can, in the summer, you don't have to freeze in your house. If you got air conditioning, let it be a little warmer. In the winter, let it be a little cooler.
Good stuff. We're about done. Any final thoughts? It's been a great interview. We're all over the map, but that was expected.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. That was expected because it does connect to everything. But any final thoughts you want to say for the audience about climate change or things they could think to do, or it's wide open?
Sure. Two quick thoughts, I guess. Number one is back to the Inconvenient Truth presentation for a second. One of the slides in there actually talks to the rate of change of the extinction of species. And that's a hockey stick as well. The rate of change in the last 50, 60 years is incredible. So we've lost something like 40 or 50,000 species on the planet in the last 50 or 60 years.
Wade Davis talks about that too in his The Wayfinders.
Right. It's substantial. And no one really knows, but it's estimated somewhere between 2 and 3 million species on the planet. So I was doing this presentation in St. John maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I got to that slide and I said, we've lost 40 or 50,000 species in the last 50, 60 years out of 2 or 3 million. And someone in the audience said, 40, 50,000 out of 2 or 3 million, that's not much. We could live with that. My response to him was, what if one of the species is us? He said, yeah, you got a good point there. One of them could be us.
Yeah. So
we've got to look after ourselves.
And we're all connected.
Yes, we are.
Thanks so much for the show.
Thank you.
It's great. Thanks for watching. Be good, have fun, and love each other.